Once upon a time in the city of Awu, there was a man named Tunde. Tunde was a man who hated the things of God, and he didn't take the things of God seriously. He saw it as a waste of time. Despite his choice of lifestyle, he was a successful businessman. Everything he laid his hands on went freely. Life was good to Tunde. He was married to a very beautiful woman called Damola. Their marriage was blessed with 3 beautiful children, 2 handsome boys, and an adorable girl. Many people in our city envied Tunde and his wife, while some people admired the love and affection between the couple. Unlike most couples in our city, Tunde and Damola loved and respected each other so much. Ever since they got married to each other, they had never quarreled in public or washed their dirty linen outside. This made a lot of people in Awo respect them a lot. Damola, his wife, was a fabric trader. She was very jovial, peaceful, and also very calm. She was a regular member at the local church, and she didn't joke with the things of God. Every morning she would make sure she prayed with her children and husband before leaving the house, before eating, before going on any journey, and also before going to bed. She believed so much in prayers and didn't joke with it. She often did this so her children would know how to pray and also cultivate the habit of praying as they grew older. However, unlike Damola, her husband Tunde was not passionate about things of God. This was because Tunde grew up in a very poor family where they struggled daily to feed, despite the fact that his parents were dedicated members of the church. He often asked his father why they weren't rich, and his father would always tell him that riches come from God. So when Tunde grew up and traveled to the city of Awo and started making money, he stopped believing in God and would only pray with his wife and go to church because it made his wife happy. He did it just to please her. Most times during prayers, Tunde would sleep off, and when the prayer was about to finish, he would wake up. He often told himself that God doesn't have the power to make people successful. If not, his parents would have been very wealthy. Every December, Tunde and his family would always travel to the village to celebrate the Christmas season with his parents. It was like a ritual to him, and he never failed to travel to the village every Christmas, no matter how busy or occupied he may be. Their children also loved the journey to the village because they often had fun whenever they went to the village. There were a lot of games to be played, and they also got to meet other children and friends from different parts of the country. It was December once again, and a day before their usual journey, Tunde went to the market to buy provisions and gifts which he would take to the village to give to his parents and friends in the village. He had finished buying the things he needed at the supermarket, and he entered his car and asked the driver to drive. On their way back home, Tunde felt a strong urge to sleep. He couldn't understand why he was feeling sleepy all of a sudden. Immediately he lost control and slept off and went into a trance. Inside his dream, he saw himself with his children, floating on the surface of a big river. In that dream, their car had fallen into the river. He watched as his daughter and son struggled to stay afloat. He saw his wife drowning and calling out for help, but there was no way he could help them. But all of a sudden, a strong wind blew, and a woman dressed in white appeared. The woman grabbed his children and his wife out of the water. Tunde saw his family standing a safe distance away from the river. He was the only one left in the river. He stretched out his hand, signaling to Tehe woman in white to pull him out of the water. But the woman was standing at the surface of the water looking at him as he struggled for his life. With his last breath, he asked the woman, "Why are you not helping me? Pull me out of the water so that I won't drown." The woman replied, saying, "Your name is not written among the people who should be saved. I'm sorry, but I can't help you." Tunde lost hope and then gave up. He drowned inside the water. Then he saw himself appearing on a white, cloudy surface, and standing before him was the woman who had refused to save him. The old woman said to Tunde, "You are neither hot nor cold in the hands of your God. How do you want to overcome temptations and tribulations? Do you realize that there are people who hate your prosperity right now, and they are planning to terminate your life and that of your family? Why don't you invite your Creator for guidance? You are so loved by God, yet you do not recognize His blessings over your life." Tunde stood speechless, watching the woman asking questions he had no answers to. He stood up and turned to leave, but the moment he turned around, the old woman called out to him, "Tunde, you have to be very careful because a new enemy has risen against you because of your success out of envy and greed. Always ask your Creator for guidance and be mindful of the things around you. It might be God trying to tell you something." Tunde turned around and listened to the old woman. When she was done, she turned around and walked away. Tunde stood surprised, looking at the old woman as she walked away and her back disappearing into the mist. He wondered how the old woman knew his name, but immediately Tunde woke up sweating. "What kind of dream is this?" he asked himself. He was in trouble and didn't understand why the woman couldn't save him in his dreams and why she was asking him to reconcile with his Creator. She talked about enemies. Who are enemies? He thought to himself. Reconcile with my Creator. Which Creator, please? Gideon Angel. I don't even understand this kind of dream. Well, it's just a dream. Tunde decided it was just a dream and didn't want to think much about it. After a few minutes, he arrived in his compound. As soon as he got home, his children ran outside to welcome him and help him carry the things he bought. His wife gave him a warm hug and welcomed him into the house, but she could tell that something was bothering Tunde. When they were alone, Damola asked him, "My husband, I can tell that something is bothering you ever since you returned from the market. Please, can you tell me what the problem is?" Tunde took a deep breath and narrated all that happened in his dream on his way back to Damola. Damola thought for a while and told Tunde that it must be a sign for him to get very close to God and take him seriously. "It must be God warning us, and maybe we shouldn't travel to the village this Christmas," Damola told him. But Tunde suddenly got up in anger and told her he wants me to cancel our trip to the village after all the preparations we've made because of what? An old strange woman in my dream. I don't even know her. Definitely not going to happen. We are leaving tomorrow and there's nothing that will change my mind. Whether I pray or not, I am covered and my family is protected. It was just a useless dream. Please, let's not act too serious about it because of an unrealistic dream. Maybe I need to treat malaria so I won't be seeing things in my dream. After he said this, he stormed out of the room. Damola didn't react. She returned to her calm nature and said a small, quiet prayer in her heart. Father Lord, I don't know what the devil is planning, but I pray and beg for your protection upon him, upon my family. Please, Lord, have mercy. Show us your endless mercy. Meanwhile, in Tunde's village, called Alumo, not everyone wished him well. Some of the villagers disliked Tunde because of his success and wealth. One of such villagers is Mrs. Simbi, the wife of a very poor farmer who struggled day and night to make a living. Mrs. Simbi has 2 sons who are still struggling to succeed in life. Each time Tunde returned to the village, Mrs. Simbi looked at him with envy and disgust, despite the fact that he always brought her gifts whenever he returned to the village. Tunde was a close friend to her first son called Benji. They both went to the city of Awa together. However, unlike Tunde, who took his life very seriously, Benji was unserious. Benji spent all his earnings chasing after women and drinking until he had nothing left and returned back to the village with nothing. Because of this, Mrs. Simbi hated Tunde because he became successful while her son returned poor to the village. She always endured the shame she felt whenever Tunde came home for Christmas, but this time she decided she would put an end to his life and that of his family. In the middle of the night, Mrs. Simbi ventured deep into the evil forest in search of a very powerful wizard known by all as Iku. The evil forest was occupied by all sorts of bad spirits. But Mrs. Simbi made up her mind to do whatever it took to end Tunde's life. After walking for hours in the quiet but deadly forest, she found a cool hut. The entrance was littered with fresh chicken flesh and bones scattered around like the den of a lion. In front of the hut was a local lamp which shined brightly. Mrs. Simbi entered the hut without fear and met the evil wizard seated on a small mat. There was also a big mirror on the wall of the hut. "Welcome, my daughter," the evil wizard said, as if he had been expecting Mrs. Simbi. Mrs. Simbi sat on a small stool which was provided for her, and without delay she told him why she had come to see him. I want Tunde and his family dead. The ridicule is getting too much and unbearable. I am ready to do whatever it takes to end their lives and ensure they do not make it to the village this Christmas. The evil wizard laughed and asked her what the man had done to her. Do you have any reasons why you would want to destroy his life? We need to have a strong reason to hold against him before this would work like something he has done in the past, or he said, or something that hurts you deeply. Mrs. Simbi thought for a while and said, yes, he once called my son a drunkard and laughed at him. He made my son feel that he was superior to him. He had my son run around for him each time he came home for Christmas. Sometimes my son would cry inside the room after running around for him. And he even bought me gifts when I didn't ask for them. He's indirectly calling me a poor woman, making me feel like a beggar. Do you have any of the items he bought for you in the past? Mrs. Simbi brought out a piece of wrapper and gave it to the wizard. Now this is solid proof to use against him. Let us proceed. They stepped out of the hut, stood under the full moon, held hands together, and began to recite incantations. As the wizard recited the incantations, the pots began to erupt fire and smoke. Your reasons were accepted, he told Mrs. Simbi. They walked back into the hut, and he dipped his hand into a calabash. This time he brought out a red cloth and used it to clean the mirror, which was on the wall of the hut. It started showing exactly what was happening at Tunde's house in Awo city. Mrs. Simbi watched Tunde and his wife neatly arranging the gifts he had brought from the market, and it got her angrier. Is that the Tunde you speak of? The evil wizard asked. Yes, it is him. I want all of them to perish in a car accident, Mrs. Simbi said in anger after thinking for a while. The evil wizard smiled at her request and said, my master does not operate on the road. We operate only close to rivers. If you want them to die by accident, then our forces can only draw them into the river. We have no power over the land. Yes. There's a bridge they would pass before they would go in the road that leads to our village. You can keep your forces around here. It will be easier to draw them into the river. The wizard gave Mrs. Simbi a knife and told her that won't be a problem. I will do as you have asked, but there is a condition to your request. No matter what happens, make sure you do not look at Tunde's face again. Even if you attend his funeral, make sure that you do not look at his corpse, or you would run mad instantly. If you accept these conditions, then stab the mirror with the knife I give to you. Mrs. Simbi eagerly accepted the evil wizard's condition without thinking twice. She used the knife and stabbed the mirror, and it broke into pieces. Ha 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 ha. It is done, the evil wizard said with an evil laugh. The next day in our city, Tunde woke up very early in the morning and started packing the bags needed for the journey. When Damola woke up, she knelt down and said her prayers. Then she went to the children's room. When she got there, she met them praying together, and it brought a smile to her face. Then she joined them in their prayers, and they all happily went to the living room when they were done. They met their father Tunde already prepared for the journey. But as they were about to leave, Damola pleaded with him to say a short prayer with them for protection during the journey. Tunde looked at her with anger. This is a very long trip, woman. You are wasting my time. I will be very careful when driving, so I don't need God to protect me, Tunde told her in a very loud voice and left the living room. Damola shook her head in disappointment, but she retained her calmness. She went on her knees to pray and was surprised when her children joined her in the prayers. She prayed for a safe journey and for God's protection. Tunde entered his luxurious car, which he had bought some days ago. He inserted his key and turned on the engine, but it refused to start. He tried and tried again, but the engine refused to start. Tunde became furious because it was a new car, and he took it to the mechanic to service it the previous day. He came down from the car and opened the bonnet to check what could be wrong, but everything appeared to be in good condition. Out of frustration, he called his mechanic, who arrived a few minutes later to check the car. After the mechanic checked the engine for some minutes, the mechanic told Tunde that he needed to take the car to his workshop to find out what the problem is. His statement only got Tunde angrier. However, Damola remained calm and continued praying in her heart. Tunde entered the living room once again, feeling defeated. He sat on one of the couches and started thinking about what to do. Damola went to sit beside him and told him, maybe God doesn't want us to travel to the village. Maybe this was what this strange woman was trying to tell him. Maybe God is giving us signs and trying to protect us. But instead of Tunde to see reasons with what his wife said, her words only got him angrier. He thought of the fun he would have in the village friends and the connections that he was going to make. He couldn't imagine missing it all. He suddenly thought of an alternative instead of giving up. We'll be taking a public transportation bus. Tunde suddenly announced to the surprise of everyone. It would be the first time the family would be traveling in a public transportation bus. Before Damola could say anything, Tunde placed a call to an Uber driver who came almost immediately to carry them to the car park where they boarded a bus to the village. As they waited patiently for the bus to get full, Damola felt a strange unease within her. She thought about trying to change Tunde's mind, but she knew him to be very stubborn. It didn't take long before the bus got filled up and the driver started the engine of the bus to commence the journey. As the journey started, Damola stood up and began to sing songs of praise and worship. Some of the passengers joined her. Her children also joined her. But Tunde simply rolled his eyes while some of the other passengers ignored and continued pressing their phones. After the songs of praise and worship, Damola said a short prayer asking God for protection and mercy throughout their journey. Some of the passengers said amen while others snubbed her. As the bus gained full speed racing down the free highway, many of the passengers fell asleep as the soft breeze and rhythm of the bus swayed and rocked them. Tunde, Damola and their children also fell asleep as the driver raced down the highway. It didn't take long before they got to the bridge that led to their village route, and immediately everyone's sleep was disrupted by a loud sound which woke them instantly. The driver was panicking and the bus was out of control. One of the tires had burst and the driver was struggling to keep the bus in control. As all the passengers were screaming in fear and shock, Damola closed her eyes and said a short prayer in her heart. But she suddenly stopped when she heard someone else praying beside her. She opened her eyes and was shocked to see her husband Tunde saying a prayer asking God to save him and his family. God, please save my family. I promise to serve you for the rest of my life. Please God, I beg of you. Damola said amen audibly to his prayers, and Tunde suddenly looked beside him when he heard her voice. As the driver was trying to control the bus, it rammed into another truck which was moving at a slow pace and ultimately stopped abruptly in the middle of the bridge. Everyone came out safe and sound except for a few passengers who had minor injuries, but Tunde and his family were not injured. Tunde felt very happy. He went on his knees with his family and praised God for sparing their lives. The news of Tunde's accident had already reached everyone. However, no one knew the outcome of the accident. They all believed that every passenger on the bus lost their lives, including Tunde and his family. Mrs. Simbi was the first woman to remove her wrapper and roll on the floor on hearing the news. She started shedding crocodile tears, wailing and crying even more than the parents and the friends of Tunde. Everyone believed they were dead, but unknown to them they had survived and were on their way to the village on another bus. When the villagers were mourning their deaths, Tunde and his family arrived in a bus with the gifts and provisions they had brought. Mrs. Simbi, who had no idea that they survived, was in the compound, and when they arrived immediately she set her eyes on Tunde. She got the shock of her life and started acting unusually. She removed her wrapper and started removing her clothes before people held her to prevent her from showing her nakedness. No one understood what happened to her. They were very happy to see Tunde and his family with the gifts he brought to the village. They quickly called for the village herbalist, but before the herbalist got to the scene, Mrs. Simbi began to confess her sins in the state of madness. She told everyone how she met the evil wizard to kill Tunde and his family because she was very jealous and envious of him. When she finished confessing, she stopped breathing. Tunde thanked his wife for always praying for him and their children. He started going to church more often and took praying very seriously. He also created vocational training centers in his village to help the youth and also engage them in meaningful livelihood. The moral lesson of this story reminds us to be mindful of the people that we gift. It is very okay to be generous, but learn to pray on your gift before giving out to people, because not everyone wishes you well. There are people who hate you just because you are successful in life and could use that against you. The more successful you are in life, always be closer to your Creator for His protection and guidance. Whenever something doesn't work as you planned, sometimes it might be God trying to protect you or shield you from danger. Sometimes disappointment is a blessing in disguise. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. Thank you.